Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing news that the independent inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act is now accepting public comments. So that means that any of you who are watching can send in your comment to this inquiry, which might be quoted in the hearings or in the final report. Now, Russ, who's with the Canadian Constitution Foundation, the same organization I work for, Russ, what advice do you have for people about the content of public comments, about the substance of their letter to the inquiry?
Probably the best way to approach it be what is the most important thing that you want to be sending to the inquiry, and try to keep it concise and clear and focused on that thing. So a 1 to 2 page submission is probably what you'd want to send in, and maybe address a question or a something specific to your experience.
Yeah, so I think you could send in a description of your experience as an observer or as a participant in the protests, or you could answer some questions. And actually, at the ccf.ca/ emergencies act inquiry, we have a list of those questions that you can answer that can help you frame your main message. Now, Russ, what are some of those questions that people might want to consider answering in their letter to the inquiry?
Sure. So some of the questions that we use as an example would be something like, did the Emergencies Act, did the invocation of the act make you afraid to attend a protest in the future, including other topics that have no relation to the Freedom Convoy? Did it make you afraid to donate to charities, even charities that have no relation to the Freedom Convoy? Again, were you concerned about your financial information being shared with governments if you donated to those groups?
Which, by the way, is a
Yeah.
question we get all the time at the Canadian Constitution
Yes.
Foundation. And just for clarity, making a donation to a registered charity like the Canadian Constitution Foundation could not result in your bank account being seized or frozen. But of course, I understand why this completely over the top reaction from the government has raised that concern among people. It's an unfounded concern, but I do understand why people have it. So it's a great question people can address in their letter to the inquiry. What else could people write about?
For people that might have been involved in protests or observed them, like what did you observe personally? Personal stories. They are important for getting the commission an understanding of that they might not have because they have such distance from it. Another one might be, what did you think that the threshold was passed if you lived in Ottawa, for example? Did you think that using the Emergencies Act was appropriate and that the threshold set by the Act was met? Things like that. Yeah.
The threshold for the act being met is an incredibly important one. That is actually part of the basis of our judicial review, our legal challenge in federal court, is that we are saying that the extremely high threshold of the Emergencies Act was not met, so it was illegal for the government to invoke it. That threshold includes the requirement that no other law can deal with the ongoing situation that's urgent, temporary, and national in scope. And frankly, because these protests were cleared using ordinary police powers, it's pretty evident in our view that that legal threshold wasn't met. One of the other things I think people could write about is this question of transparency. Why hasn't the government provided more information about why the Emergencies Act was invoked? This is part of what we have been in federal court fighting over. We brought a motion to seek access to documents about the explanation that the government has, cabinet level documents that explain why they invoked, the government suggests, it explains why they invoked the Emergencies Act, and the government has not been transparent. They have not shared that information. They have continued to claim privilege over that information despite our legal challenges. And I think that that's another thing people could address in their questions. Has the government provided a sufficient explanation about why this emergency legislation, which is extraordinary legislation, why it was invoked? We got to go to commercial break. But in the next segment, Russ, I want to talk to you about the background that people need to be aware of when sending in a public comment, because it's really important to recall some of the factual background about what was happening around the Freedom Convoy, as well as the legal background around this act, which, as I've said, is extraordinary legislation. We've got to go to break, but we will be right back.